Hello and welcome to the first demonstration video of the colored pencil Bellringer unit. You are going to need 3 pencils. We're going to need a white and a black, and you also need a color. I would like for you to use a medium tone color. So that means not a light color like the yellows or the pinks, and not too dark of a color like the dark greens, the dark blues, the purples. So you want to make sure that you pick something that's kind of a medium tone. So like that scarlet red is a good one, orange is a good one, this lighter blue is a good one. Just make sure that it's not too dark or too light. I also want you to know that you will be using that same color in all 4 of your practices so that you can truly see if you are getting better with that color rather than switching colors and realizing that each color kind of has its own difficulties. So we are going to be working with the same colors for all 4. I also want you to start getting into the practice of trying to sharpen your pencils before we begin. And I know there are many people to each table and usually only one sharpener. So if you don't sharpen it before this practice, that's okay, no stress. So I want you to collect your colors. You are going to grab a black, a white, and a medium toned color. So go ahead and grab your pencils. If you've got a second, you can sharpen them, but if not, that is okay. We're going to begin with our black colored pencil, and we're going to start this the same way that we did for our drawing Bellringers. We're going to turn our paper so this value scale is closest to us. We're dividing it the same way by giving ourselves that outside border, dividing our sections in half, dividing each of those sections in half, and those sections in half once more. So that gives us a total of 8 sections. I like to label this bottom one with a 0 because it represents white, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So we are labeling our Bellringers. Then I like to turn it back so that the value scale is closest to me again. Now I am going to begin by filling in value number 7 with my black colored pencil, and I'm going to border the outside edge of this value scale first so that I'm giving myself a nice clean border. I'm also going to border the bottom of this little section of my value scale, and this is going to be solid black. Now with colored pencil, we want to make sure that we're reaching a texture called burnished, which is where if you lift your paper, you can see the reflection because it is so filled in that it is shiny. That is the texture that all of the rest of this picture should reach before the end. Now that was value 7. Moving into value 6, we are going to just start pressing a little bit lighter. And I like to begin lighter than I think I'll need, and then to go back in and kind of fill those sections, and also to just color right along that line that's dividing number 7 from number 6, and that just kind of helps them to blend together. Next, we're moving in to value 5, and this is going to be our lightest that we can color for this value. So we are just going to continue pressing lighter and lighter, and we want to fade it out by the time we get to value 4. So we're just barely dusting it. Now here is a strange little tip that I'm going to be talking with you a lot about for colored pencils. Now I like to rotate whether I'm working with a crispy point or a flat edge of my pencil. Now when I'm filling darker values, I like to find a crispy point. So I'll like turn my pencil until I get like a nice sharp corner, and I like to use that to fill in my darker values. But as I'm working on fading out to white, I like to find a flat edge. So as I'm working on like this edge where it's fading out to white, I like to try and find like a flat, soft edge so that I don't make very many lines when I'm working with those light values. So right now we're going back in and just perfecting. We want this to be a super smooth transition out from these 3. So we start with black, we have medium, and then our light, which fades into white right here. And we're just going back through and perfecting our texture. We want to find that crispy point of your pencil while we're filling in the darker edges, and you want a flat edge of your pencil when you're working on fading out to white. So we're going to just get this as smooth as we can. We want to make sure the borders are filled in up against the side edges of our value scale. And now we're going to switch to our color. Our color is going to fill in solidly for value 4. So I'm going to draw my outside border just like we did when we filled our black solidly. So I'm giving myself a border. I'm filling this completely solid. And you'll know if you're done because it becomes kind of shiny when you lift it up. And that shows you that it's got so much that the wax is built up and it's reflecting the paper's light. Now we're going to take this same pressure and we are filling all the way up to where it is solid black. So we're using small little circles starting on our lighter end, and we are working our way up and just covering that light layer of black with a very filled in layer of blue. And that is what allows these colors to mix so perfectly and beautifully, because it's filling in those lighter areas with that solid color, so it allows them to have a beautiful transition. Now we are going to work on fading our blue out. So we've got this solid blue. We're going to take it and go medium, or the dark, medium, and light, and then we want to fade out by the time we get to white. So we're going to come in now with our color, and you may not have blue. That's a totally personal choice, 100% up to you, just as long as it's a medium tone. But we are going through and filling this in so that it is just a little bit lighter than the solid one. Next, we are going to add just a lighter layer. And for value 1, it's just barely there. And for this, we want to use a flat edge of our pencil. So I'm just barely filling this in. We want to have a nice smooth transition out to white. Now to go back in and perfect, I'm going to find a crispy point of my pencil, and I'm just going into those patches where it's just a little bit lighter, and I'm filling them so that this value scale is as perfect as I can get it before I go over the top of it. This is what really makes or breaks it, is this value scale here. So I want you to take your time and get this to be a perfectly smooth transition from dark to medium to light. Remember, when we're working on our light values, we find a flat edge. If we're working in the dark or medium values, we can turn our pencil until we find a nice crispy point to help us fill in those values. So we're just working on perfecting our value scale now. We want to have a nice smooth transition from dark to medium to the lightest we can color. Now, once we've got that smooth transition, we're going to switch to our white colored pencil. We always look at the point of our pencil, and if there's color on it, we just color along that edge of the pencil on a separate area to clean it off. Now we're going to start on our lightest line. So we're going to go right on this edge, and we're using very heavy pressure, like press really hard with your white. That is how you get it to blend out to white as smoothly as possible. We're going to work our way up, and we are burnishing. So we're filling this in with super heavy pressure all the way until we get to value 4. So we're just bringing that all the way up until we have just that solid blue at value 4. All right, now you can take a minute and just kind of go through and perfect if you have some spots on your value scale that might not be as smooth as they could be. So one thing to know is that you can go back over the top with your original color if you realize that you've got patches or something that's not quite as smooth as it could be. So you can layer back over the top and then continue burnishing with your light color on top of that layer. All right, now we are moving into our sphere. So we're going to draw that triangle from the outermost edge of the side and the bottom of our sphere. Now this is going to tell us where our values need to go, and we're drawing in that same little curved crescent moon very lightly with our black. And then we want this section that we're filling with value to be pretty tiny, so make sure not to go too large for this space, but we are just drawing in that little triangle that wraps its way around. Now, when we get started filling this in, we are not going solid black for this. We are going mostly there, just not all the way to that burnished level. So we're filling in a dark edge inside of this longer skinny triangle. And as we work our way out, we're pressing lighter and lighter. Next, we are going to fill our highlight space. And with this, we don't want to leave any white down at the bottom, so it's all going to be a very light value. I'm going to bring this medium tone down a little bit. So take a look up here right now, and I want to make you aware that this highlight starts a little bit lower. So I'm going to bring in like a medium tone, and then down here is where our highlight is. So I'm just going to fill that with our lightest value that we can use. Next, on top of our value scale, we want to get this to have a nice smooth transition quite quickly out to white. So I'm going along this edge, and when I'm working on my darker values, I try to find a crispy part of my pencil to fill in. If I'm working on fading out to white, I usually try to twist my pencil until I find a nice flat edge. So we're going along the top edge of this little value scale, and we are just working our way out to white. And as we work our way out to white, we want to use that flat edge of our pencil. So rotate till you find a nice soft flat edge, and we're using small circles with like the lightest pressure you can possibly manage just to dust the outside of that value scale so that we have a nice transition from our dark to the medium to the light. So we're just perfecting this value scale. We don't need to go very far out. With drawing pencil, we went much farther out with this value, but we have to save some space to come in with our blue. So make sure that you don't go too far out for this layer. We just want it to be nice and close to where our original triangle was. So we want that to be super smooth. Remember, this is where all of the magic happens. Like if your value scale is not smooth underneath, when you burnish, it's not gonna make it any smoother, so it's just gonna be uneven. So we need to really take our time here and get this as perfect as we can before we come in for that burnishing layer. Now, when you're finished with that value scale in black, you're going to come in with your color. And we're going to give ourselves a couple specific things. First, we're filling in our highlight and we're burnishing. So that means we're pressing very heavily, enough to make our paper shiny. So we outlined the bottom of our triangle. Now we're going to outline the outside edge, right where that value is changing. As we're doing that, we are going to give ourselves 3 lines, quite close together, but 3 solid lines of our color. So there was 1. Now I'm adding a second, and then I'm adding my 3rd line, just kind of wrapping around that edge. So it shouldn't be too thick, but we do want to have a stretch of solid filled in blue that's left alone. Now we're going to come from our lightest side of our triangle of value that we did with our black, and we're using small little circles to burnish over the top of the black that we've added. So we're pressing very heavily. I like to spin my pencil to find some, like the crispy parts, the pointy parts, to fill in a little bit better. Now we're looking at our reference photo, and next we're trying to build out to this line. I want you to draw this line right now. So take a look at the board, and on your reference photo, you are outlining that eyeball. Next, we are going to take our pencil, and when I'm trying to draw softly and I don't have a good flat edge, I'll give myself a flat edge by creating it. And I'll just take my pencil and push very hard, like in an extra spot that doesn't matter. And then I won't spin my pencil in my hands, and I can use that flat edge to make soft values. Now we are going to try to create the lightest border around that eyeball shape that we can. So I'm just giving myself this border, and I'm putting my finger here to like really help me focus on creating the shape that I see. Not what I imagine this to look like, but I'm really looking back and forth to make that edge as light and smooth as possible, and also to make sure that it's in the right location. Now we are bridging the gap between our solid blue and our lightest blue. So to do that, when I'm working on my darker values, I like to spin my pencil so I've got a crispy part, and I'm just adding a nice light layer right over that line of blue. We want to have a nice smooth transition here. So I'm just drawing directly over the top of that line with small circles, just not fully pushing down, not using as much pressure. Now I'm just slowly working on connecting those sections. We want to have a smooth transition from the light border we gave ourselves and the dark solid blue that we gave ourselves on the other side of our shadow. Now we're just bridging the gap between those values now, and we are just trying to get a nice smooth transition all the way out to white that stays in that eyeball shape. So I'm just going through, and now I am working again on that lightest area. So I don't have a great flat spot on my pencil, so I'm going to create one by just pushing really hard on a random part of my paper to help give me that flat edge that I need. And I'm just using those small circles to go along that edge and just like dust along that edge to really give me a nice light area. Now, I want to have you notice and take a look up here on the board that we have a section of light blue that's like coming up to the eyeball from where our original darker triangle was. So make sure that this section is not filled in too dark when you are working. We want that to stay nice and light. So we're filling that in and having a nice smooth transition from solid blue all the way out to white. And this is the harder part of this practice. So I want you to take your time here. Try adjusting your pressure on your pencil so that it's very light. So you're making super subtle moves rather than like a really big move that accidentally like gets you too dark too quickly. So we're just going along and perfecting this. Take your time. We want this to be as smooth as we can get it. And when you're ready, you're going to switch to white. Now, again, we always clean our white. We need to check it and clean it. And then we're going to come in around our lightest border, and we're using super heavy pressure, and we're going around the eyeball edge and just trying to soften the blue. And it's interesting because you can actually manipulate the blue underneath the white. So when I'm pressing really hard and using these little circles, it's kind of like smudging the blue layer underneath it into the shape that I want it to be. Now, we're going to work our way out to where we added those 3 lines of our solid color. And then once we get to that area where it's just solid blue, that's where we want to stop using our white. Now, we want to blend this so that we don't have any borders, so you can kind of go along the outside edge of that blue. We just don't want to bring the white all the way into our shadow space. So we're just using our white to kind of get rid of any edges. And if you see an edge, like a line, just take your white and go right on top of that line really heavily, and that should help to kind of even it out or smooth the edges away. You can always layer, so you can bring back in your solid blue if you kind of lost it, and we can just layer and perfect until we get it right. So we're just kind of layering now and adding in more of our solid color. We can come back in with our white and kind of get rid of any solid edges that we may have, but we want to spend some time perfecting here. Once we're done with the sphere, we are going to switch to filling in our shadow. So we're going to take our black, and we are just filling right up against the bottom of our sphere. And notice that the shadow goes directly under this sphere. So we want to pull that line farther out than where our triangle ends. So we pull it a little bit farther out, and then we're filling this triangle with solid black. We want to make sure that we fill that edge so we're not leaving a white gap between our sphere and our triangle. We've got that solid black shadow. Now we're going to give ourselves the border that comes straight out and kind of curves slightly backwards. And from here we're using our black to create a small value scale. And we are just going to let this fade out to a nice light medium. And remember that as we're working in these darker medium spots, it's helpful to twist your pencil until you find a nice sharp point to help fill in those grainy spots. Because when you're working with a flat edge and you're using your pencil for filling something that's dark or medium, then it skips over those areas because it's so flat, and it makes it hard to fill in those grainy dots. So that's why we spin our pencil as we're doing this. Now, once we've got the shadow filled in, we are going to give ourselves a light border in our background, and we are just outlining the outside of the sphere, which again, I want you to turn your paper as you do that step. And we're just giving ourselves like a medium border, so not solid black, but pretty dark, like a 6 to a 5 value on this value scale. So we're giving ourselves our border not only around the sphere, but around the rectangle itself. And because I'm right-handed, I try to always color on the right side of each line. That's so that I can see right where my pencil is touching the line. And if you're left-handed, of course, you would always color on the left side of each line. But I just always spin my paper so that it allows me to color on the right side. Now I'm going to fill this background using a crispy point of my pencil, and I'm just going through and adding small circles. Remember, we don't want to fill this with lines, and we don't want our circles to be too large either. So we want to keep these circles like sort of compared to the point of our pencil. Like that's the size of the circle, like very, very small circles to help you avoid showing your lines here. Now, we're just going to fill this background with a medium tone. It does not need to be very dark. We're going to come over the top of this with our blue. So we're just filling this with small circles. Remember to continuously turn your pencil in your hands so that you're working with that pointy part of your pencil rather than the flat edge for filling. We don't want that flat edge for filling. We want the point for filling. And that's just to help you avoid having more grainy spots than you need. So we want this to be as smooth as possible. We also want it to be as even as possible. So if you have any patches that are light, go back in and work on filling those. And you can just take a look at your background and see, like, are there any patches that I need to go back and fix? This should all be as even as possible. So take your time with that step. Next, we are going to come in with our color, and we always start with the lightest areas to draw first. And I'm going to begin by giving myself that very skinny little highlight along the top edge of the countertop or this tabletop. And then I'm going to give myself a border along the shadow and along the sphere. And then I'm just going to burnish inside of this space, so I'm filling it completely solidly. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side, so I'm giving myself that tiny crispy little highlight, and I'm gonna turn my paper so that I'm coloring on the right side of this line because I'm right-handed, left side if you're left-handed. Giving myself a border. I'm gonna go along this shadow, give myself a border there, and I'm gonna give myself a border on the outside edge of this rectangle just to make it easier to fill. Now that we've got our border, we can just fill the entire section that we outlined with blue, or your color, whichever you chose. I know I keep saying blue, but you guys have free choice in the color you're using, just as long as it's the same throughout your practices. We want to avoid having any lines show up in this space, so make sure that you're using small circles, make sure that you're spinning your pencil in your hands so that as you start to create flat spots, you can find new little crispy points to make sure you're filling all of those little grainy spots from the paper. Once the entire tabletop is filled, you're going to start on the lighter side of your shadow. And you want to avoid going up and down through your shadow. That's going to carry the black and pull it into your tabletop. So when we are filling in our shadow, it's very important that you don't go through it. We want to stay within this space. So it's almost like we have our own little border that's set right here. So make sure you're not going through it, but we are going to cover this entire shadow with burnished version of your color. The final step is to go through and burnish over the top of our background. And again, I highly recommend you give yourself a border. So we're gonna go around the outside edge of our rectangle. And I'm spinning my paper so this whole time I can color on the right side of the line. And I'm gonna color on the right side around my sphere. We wanna be extra careful through here. Now that I have my border, I am just going to burnish over the top of our black layer that we added originally. I'm using small circles. And we want to get rid of any possible texture. So it should be completely smooth. Our goal for this is to make it look like it's been printed. You should not see any directional lines or texture left over from the paper or light coloring. This should all be completely filled in and completely solid. Now, there is our final piece. You can blow away your crumbs, which sometimes does reveal spots that you may not have filled in all the way because it looked like they were filled but had a crumb on top. So blow away the dust and make sure that you've got all of those sections filled in. And those were the steps. So now you can take a minute, just do a little bit of perfecting, but great job with your first colored pencil practice.